Storytime with Grena. Hello everybody and welcome one more week to Storytime with Grena. I'm Grena Lawson and you wouldn't guess what I'm here for. Exactly, I'm here to tell you a story in the next 7 minutes. This story may or may not have happened, and I'm afraid you will have to wait until next week to find out if it is true or not. For now, it's your choice. Last week, I told you about that one time when my brain decided that a city I had already visited was not relevant enough for me to remember. And that story is... true. Scary, but unfortunately, it is true. Funny what kind of memories our brains decide to throw away or to keep. Anyway, let's move on to today's story. We all have regrets in life. We've all made decisions that, in hindsight, were plainly stupid. And this is one of those. As you know, I've always loved singing. I discovered our local karaoke bar thanks to one of my friends from college. And I guess that was the bane of my friend group, because after that, whenever I had the chance, I would suggest going there. It didn't always work out, but on that night in particular, it was my birthday. So no one can say no to the birthday girl. Since I loved showing off, being on the spotlight, I would always give my everything to every performance. I would always put on an absolute show. I'm not a very good dancer, but I would move to the rhythm. I would sing my heart out and my lungs out like I was performing for Live Aid or something like that, even if it was only like 4 regulars who were not even paying attention to me and were probably too drunk to notice if I was doing it right or not. And of course, that night was no exception. So after a few, because I would always go on stage several times. In fact, I think the people in that karaoke bar were delighted with me because I would always bring a lot of people and I would always draw everyone's attention because I was so intense and so enthusiastic on stage. So yeah, basically they already knew me there. And that was my mistake, because on that night, after a few of my crazy performances, one of my friends, who was a bit of a... how would I describe it? I don't know if I should say a risk taker, an adrenaline junkie, or simply a kleptomaniac. But the thing is that she loved pushing the limits in a way. So she thought it would be hilarious to leave the karaoke bar without paying. And for some reason, I don't know if maybe we were a little bit tipsy or something like that, but we all decided that it was a great idea, that it would be very, very funny to leave without paying. So when we decided that the time was right, we picked up our bags, our jackets, and we headed out of the karaoke bar. But you know how people say, if you want to get away with anything, the key is to act confidently and naturally, like you belong? Or, in other words, walk, don't run? Well, it sounds like we never learned that lesson. Because we did exactly the opposite. We were anything but subtle. We were giggling, eyes darting in every direction. We were rushing out of the karaoke bar. So, obviously, the waitress came running behind us like, hey, you forgot to pay! We ignored her. And we kept running and running and running until we were far away enough, because we were idiots. The thing is, we reached a new level of stupidity when we decided to go back to the same bar a few months later. Hey, in our defense, at least we waited for a couple of months. And we didn't make the mistake of going the week after, if that is any defense. So a few months later, we returned to the karaoke bar. And as soon as we sat down and the waitress came to take our orders, she said, "This time you have to pay right now. And by the way, you still owe me money from last time." It would have been a lot easier to say, "Yeah, sorry, we forgot," or "It was just a prank," or something like that, but no. Like I said, we were idiots. So of course we decided to try and deny everything. Like, "No, no, no, what are you saying? We've never been here before. This is absolutely our first time here." Of course, that lady didn't believe us. But since she couldn't prove anything, she simply said something like, "Oh, well, maybe she looked like you. Anyway, you have to pay right now." And we did, of course we did. But still, that lady kept looking at us with suspicion. She wouldn't take her eyes off us, and for a good reason. And that's when I had a revelation. I couldn't go on stage. I had a very distinct style and a very distinctive way of performing. So going on stage would mean getting immediately recognized and proving everyone right. So that was torture for me, because where's the fun in going to a karaoke bar if you cannot sing? Anyway, the moral of this story is, don't try to do a dine and dash or a drink and dash. And if you decide to do it for some reason, at least don't do it in one of your favorite places. Now that you've heard the story, what do you think? Did I really celebrate my birthday by doing a drinks and dash on my favorite karaoke bar? Were we stupid enough to return a few months later? Find out next week on another episode of Storytime with Grena. See you next week!